Hello, welcome to Classical Greek Latin. My name is Josh and I am the teacher for this course. This course is our Latin course following Wheelock's Latin, and we are on lesson 3 and chapter 2. So last lesson, chapter 1, lesson 2, we covered verbs, first and second conjugation, laudo and moneo, for example. Today we're going to get into nouns and adjectives. Nouns and adjectives operate in a very similar way. So let's just get started here. So in English, we have parts of speech. We have, for example, the subject and the direct object. Now in English, that is determined by word order. So let's look at the example they give us here. And we have, which one do we want to use? Let us use sample number A. So the poet is giving the girl large roses. I like this translation or this wording better. The poet is giving large roses to the girl. Okay. So in English, the poet is first because he is the subject. And we know he's the subject because he is first, right? Now, after the subject comes the verb, the action that the subject is doing, right? So the action starts with the subject, and then it's going to land on the direct object. In this case, what is being given? It's the large roses. So the large roses are the direct objects, So you have the subject, verb, direct object, word order, and then you have the indirect object here. That is, to whom are the roses given? That is, to the girl. So English depends on word order for us to know what part of speech that word is. That is it a subject? Is it the direct object? Is it an indirect object? Speaking of nouns, right? So in Latin, word order is not necessary to communicate which part of speech a word is. In Latin, they use cases, okay? So let's flip over to that page real quick. And let's see which page it is. So flip over to page 14. And let's look at cases, okay? And then we're going to go, so these are cases here. They're abbreviated. We're going to go over these in detail, so don't worry. But they are nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative, and vocative. Vocative we're not going to use a whole lot, but it's here to learn it in the beginning. Okay, so port means gate, right? Okay, and then magna means large, so the large gate, okay? So in Latin, we can decide if the gate is the subject, direct object, or indirect object, not by where it falls in the sentence order, but what ending it has on the end, okay? So porta here in the nominative is going to be our subject, okay? Let's skip the genitive and dative for now and skip to the accusative, the ACC here, accusative. That is going to be portam. That is going to be your direct object, right? So and we'll go through examples of this and we'll see how this works. But you have porta. So the root of this word, the stem of this word is port. The inflection or the bending of the end of the word, inflection means to bend, right? Is to it changes the function of that word from in this case from a nominative, which is a subject, functions as a subject, to which is a direct object. Now, so it's gone from nominative to accusative, from subject to direct object. So it doesn't matter where in the sentence that word falls now, because we know how it functions because of its ending or its inflection, which we call a case. So this is the nominative case, genitive case, dative case, accusative case, ablative case, vocative case. So these are the case endings, the inflections, the bending of the end. Okay? I, Okay. Remember, this is a is a diphthong. We pronounce it I. All right? We'll talk about adjectives in just a second. So that's a general overview there. So let's see here. Okay, let's just go through each case and talk about it a little bit. And so our first case is nominative. So that list of words that I showed you, that chart, it is called a declension because it declines, or it declines from the most important to the less important, beginning with the subject, going through all the way down to the ablative. Okay, that's what the word, that is a declension. All right, so we have the title of this word first, declension. So declension just means the listing of those words, nominative, genitive, from descending order from the top to the bottom, from the most to the least important, as they appear and as they're used in grammar. Okay, so nominative case, that just refers to it comes from the word nome, which means name. It's also where we get the word noun. In Latin, that just means it is the subject. So think about language a little bit in a philosophical way for a moment. There always has to be movement, action of some kind that begins somewhere and then ends somewhere. Okay, it begins with the nominative. The subject is responsible for the action. Okay, so in our sample here, which one did we use? The poet, right? The poet is responsible. He's the genesis. Well, let's not use that word. He's the beginning of the action. The action starts with him, the subject. That is the nominative case, right? So the poeta is giving, right, the large roses to the girl. Okay, and I'm going to use to the girl instead of just the girl to distinguish the dative when we get to that. Okay, nominative, subject. That's where the action begins. All right, onward we go, page 13. The next case in that list that we looked at on page 14, nominative, genitive. Genitive case just means, if you translate that as of, like, so the roses of the poet, they belong to the poet, right? And then he gives them to the girls in the indirect case. So genitive, just think of it as of. And if you look at the word genitive and think of generate, genesis, it's a place, a source of where things come from. Often it means possession, right? The flowers of the poet, they belong to the poet. He's not responsible for making the flowers. He didn't generate them. They grew in the ground like flowers do, but they are his, right? He owns them. So in that case, it's possession, right? So if you translate, whenever you see genitive, so that's I, and then a, right? Let me write that out for you just to have the visual here. Let's write this out as we go. So we have the nominative. I'm spelling out the whole word right now. You don't have to do that. You can abbreviate it with just nom. That's going to be a. Now these are just the endings, just the inflections, right? So the case, so this is the case. Which case is it? Nominative. And this is the inflection. Okay? The ending, right? The case ending. Okay? And then you have genitive, which is what we're talking about right now. Genitive. And that's going to be the diphthong a. And remember, I say the vowels as they're pronounced, right? So don't be confused. A is pronounced I. That's genitive, so it means of. So we have the nominative is going to be the subject. The genitive, if you translate it as of, you're almost always going to be right. And we can say it often means possession, not always. But that is a very common use of the genitive case. Okay? All right, let's go to the next one. Dative case. Dative, that word literally means, it goes from do, dare in Latin, which means to give. So you give, just like we had in our example, right? He gives the large roses to the girl. So she's in the dative case. And we're gonna do this sentence in Latin as well later in just a few minutes. But the dative case, to or for the girl. So the roses are given to or for the girl, right? In that case, they're given to her. So when we get to the Latin form of that sentence, the girl is going to be in the dative case, right? And again, dot means to give to. So if you can remember that, he gives dot do dare, to give. That'll help you just translate that as to or for. Okay, and that is also a diphthong pronounced I. Okay, now you may notice here that the genitive and the dative are identical. Another way of saying that is the dative and genitive are indistinguishable from each other in this particular declension. So this declension is a list of words ending in "a," basically, which is usually, feminine. We have a second declension, third, and all the way up to 5 declensions in Latin. So in this particular declension, the genitive and dative are indistinguishable from each other, which will cause a little bit of confusion later on. But with help of context and sentences, we can figure out which is which. Okay, but essentially, genitive and dative are not distinguished from each other in this particular case, and it's somewhat artificial that we write them out twice. And that is just a teaching tool, right? But let's not get bogged down in that. Dative is I, translate as to or for. All right, so now let's jump into accusative case. All right, so accusative. Now, if the action started somewhere with the subject, namely, it's got to end somewhere, right? So this is going to be direct object. So the direct object, you could see it as like a stop sign. That's where the action stops. That's where the action in part gets its meaning, right? If you say, I am going, let's see, that's not a good example because that's going to be confusing. Let's use it, and we'll use it in an awkward way. Say, I am going to Rome, right? The city of Rome. In Latin, you can just say, I am going Romam, and that is I call that a locative accusative of location. That is, the action of going stops in Rome, right? So the action of giving stops with the flowers, right? There, what is the poet giving? The roses, right? The large roses, and then the roses incidentally are then given indirectly to the girls, right? But the first recipient of that action of giving is the roses. So that would be the accusative case, right? Okay. Next, we have ablative case. Now, if you are taking the Greek course, which we also offer on this channel, you will note that Greek does not have ablative. Latin does, okay? And the ablative case is going to look like the nominative case, except notice I drew a macron, a long mark. Macron means long, right? So long mark over the A, right? And ablatus means to be borne or carried away from. So a good way of translating, let's see, it's similar to the dative in that it's an indirect motion, but instead of to or for, it's away or from, okay? So let's see, how do they translate it down here at the bottom? They say by, with, let's say by, with, and let's say away from, so we're not confusing that with the genitive. Okay, but if you translate that case ending, that inflection, the case is ablative, the inflection is when you see that on the end of a word with that long mark, if you translate it by, with, or away from, you can make sense of how that word is functioning in the sentence, regardless of where it's placed in the sentence. Okay, then the last case that we're going to look at today is the vocative case, and this looks just like the nominative, and it's indistinguishable from the nominative. You have to use context to determine the vocative, and that is just when you are addressing someone. So that is, let's see how they word it here in Wheelock. So vocative means to woko wakare, means to call, right? So you see that here, to call. The word literally means to call. So if you remember what these cases mean, nominative, name, subject, right? Genitive, the generator of, dative, to or for, given to or for, Accusative, that is where everything comes to a head, right? That's where the action stops and is defined. Ablative, carried away from or by. And then vocative is you are calling to someone, like, hey, you. And then you're going to put their name in the vocative, right? So, let's see here. We don't really have this concept in English, except maybe oftentimes, rather than just say calling someone by their name to get their attention, we'll say, hey Josh, or hey whoever. And that might kind of be evocative in English, but we really don't have evocative in English today. Okay, so I'm just going to say, what do we want to say? Vocative. Let's just say, we'll say to call, because that's what vocative means, to call. Okay, and you'll see how that functions when we get some examples coming out of that. Okay. Yeah, here we go. O puela. So that is not a nominative, puela. That is a vocative because he is addressing her. Serva me, vocative, second person singular. Save me, the accusative direct object. Oh girl, save me, right? So that's in the vocative there. And then serva is a verb. Second person singular, imperative, and then me is the accusative. Little refresher there. Okay, so nouns and adjectives. All right, so we talked about the endings here, right? I wrote them out. Ah. Okay, we'll get to the plural in a second, but let's tackle this concept first of adjectives and nouns match each other, okay? So if you want to say the gate is the subject, we're going to put gate in the nominative case, porta. If it's not the small gate, it's the large gate, we want to say the porta magna. But note that the magna, the adjective here, which means the large or great, the big, is also in the nominative. It has the nominative case ending or inflection, a. So porta magna, large gate. Okay, you cannot have porta magnam. That wouldn't make sense because your porta would want to be the nominative subject, and then the descriptor for that word would want to be the direct object, and that's chaos. They're clashing. So the adjective has to match the noun. Okay? Nouns, we're dealing with the first declension noun right here. So we're dealing with the first declension noun here, which is feminine. So a noun comes in one gender. It's either feminine or masculine, or it's neutered. Neither of those. It's neutered, right? So in that case, it would be, well, we'll talk about masculine neutered later. Stick with the feminine. So a noun has one gender. It can only ever be that. A porta, a gate, is always going to be feminine. It will never change to masculine, us, right? Or for neutered. It'll always be because that's what this noun is. It's feminine. Magna, on the other hand, is an adjective, and it has to match the noun, not only in the case as nominative in this instance, to be the subject, but it also has to match the gender. So magna could also be magnus, which would be masculine. It can also be magnum, which will be neutered. Because as an adjective, it's going to have to describe more than just a gate. So in some instances, it will have to describe a boy, puer. Right? So puer magnus, the large boy, right? So boy is always masculine, puer, but the adjective to describe him as a big boy, a large boy, would be masculine also to match him, right? So magnus, so the adjective can change its gender, okay? Now, they have to match. The noun and the adjective have to match each other if they're going together. If the adjective is describing that noun, it has to match it in case, that is nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative, or vocative, gender, and then also number. Okay, now number just means singular or plural. So if you have a singular gate here, porta, the descriptor, the adjective, is also going to be singular, magna. All right, so it is both nominative, porta, magna, nominative, nominative, but it is also singular, porta, singular, magna, singular. Now, we don't think of adjectives in English as having number, but they do in Latin. And then the gender, feminine porta, feminine magna. Okay, so let's flip the page and let's look at now the plural. Okay, so if we look at the nominative again, okay, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative, vocative. So just as in the previous page, we had, what is it? I, a. Okay, going down the list here, nominative all the way down to vocative. In the plural, it is I, arum, is, as, is, I. Okay, so let's go to the nominative. We're talking about plural now. So the large gates, plural gates, not just one, but many, or at least two, right? So you have portae, feminine, it's nominative, feminine, and plural. Okay? The adjective describing those gates also has to be nominative, plural, and feminine. So it's portae, magnae. If you were to say portae, magna, and have a plural gates with a singular magna, it would not make sense. It would be chaos. We don't want chaos. They've got to match. So they've got to match in case. All right, that's going to be these over here. Nominative, right? Number, that is singular or plural, right? Number, is it singular or plural? And then gender. Is it masculine, feminine, or neutered? Okay, it's those three have to match. The noun will always be the one gender it's in this case, portas, feminine. So the adjective, in this case, magna, is going to match that, or portae, magnae. And the same principle applies for all these cases. So portae, the gates, as the subject, portarum, of the gates, that's our genitive, right, of, possession. Right, let's see, the bars of the gates, right? The bars are owned or possessed by the gates, if you will. Portis, dative, right? So to or for the gates. Portas, and again, note the long marks here. Portas is accusative, that is the gates are the direct object, and then portis, ablative, away from the gates or by the gates, and then portae. I guess you could use the vocative for gates if you're in Lord of the Rings and you're addressing the gates with a password, perhaps. But otherwise, I don't know why you would address gates. Okay, so, but that is that. And note also there are some potential points of confusion here. Your dative and ablative are indistinguishable here. We've written them out twice for the sake of consistency, maintaining the declension, nominative, all the way through to vocative. But in declension number 1, the feminine declension, the dative plural and the ablative plural are the same. So context is going to tell us how to translate. Are we going to translate to or for, or away or from or by? Okay, and we'll get into that in a second. Okay, we talked about gender. You can read these paragraphs on your own. They're going to try and tell you that the ancients were not poetic and how they saw words as symbolic of male or female. I think they did see it more literally. They're going to tell you that it's a mere grammatical concept, which is a modern concept, which I disagree with. Not a big deal. Read these two paragraphs on your own. Adjective, agreement, and word order. We talked about that. Let's see, they're talking about attributive adjectives. And yeah, we will cover that as we go. All right, let's look at grammar, morphology, and syntax. Two major aspects of a language's grammar are its morphology and syntax. Morphology refers to the forms of words, such as verb conjugations and noun, adjective declensions. Don't get bogged down with these terms. Syntax, morphology. I'm not a big fan of such terms. Just be familiar with them. Syntax, it comes from the word synthetein in Greek, which means to arrange, like troops in a battle formation in a line moving forward. It refers to the arrangement of words and their interrelation to each other. Okay, so read through that. All right, now let's look at that Latin sentence. So this is the Latin of that English sentence we looked at in the very beginning. If you remember, here, the poet is giving the girl large roses, or as I prefer, the poet is giving large roses to the indirect object dative girl. So now we have that in Latin. So let's look at it. Okay, so we have poeta. So we know that this is nominative. Okay, it could be vocative, but there's no one. I know I'm going over this quickly, and you will acquire this quickness as you learn Latin better. But I know there's no imperative verb in here, so I know that the poet is not being addressed. So I know that even though the nominative and vocative are the same, I know that this is nominative and not vocative because there's no imperative verb in this sentence. And I can see that by looking at it, and you will be able to see that by looking at it as you learn, as we progress through the lessons. So I know poeta is nominative, singular, and feminine. Actually, it's poeta. I think it might be masculine. In Greek, it's masculine. We'll look it up later. Let's just call it first declension for now. It's a, okay? And I'll have to look up to see if it's poeta in Latin is masculine. In Greek, it is. Okay. Poeta, not to distract you. Nominative, singular. It's the subject. So the poet is doing something, okay? Now, puelai, remember, I, genitive, dative, you can't tell them apart except from context. And also we could put it another way, the genitive and dative singular in the first declension, I, going through this list right here, genitive and dative are indistinguishable. We write them out twice, or for the sake of pedagogy, a learning tool, right? So this could be genitive, it could be dative, right? So the poet of the girls, or excuse me, of the singular girl, this could also be a nominative, plural. I know this is a lot, but I know it's not plural because I know the verb is singular. Okay. So, okay. I hope I'm not overwhelming you right now. So let's see here. All right. So I know poeta is the subject because it's nominative form, and we're not using an imperative to address him. Okay. And puelai, so it's the poet of the girl? Is it the girl's poet? Or is it the poet to or for the girl? Right? So we really don't know yet. So we have to keep going in the sentence, right? Magnas, okay, so there's big. Now os, with a long mark over the a, I know that is accusative plural. Accusative plural feminine. All right, and you'll know this also when you memorize those declensions, which you must memorize them. Otherwise, life will be miserable for you in the Latin world. Okay, so I know this is accusative plural, and it's going to go with the noun rosas, which is also accusative plural, which is great and convenient because those go together now. So the big roses, or the bigs, plural, roses. Okay, so note, accusative, plural, feminine. Accusative, plural, feminine. They have to match. The big roses. All right, he gives. Okay, now I know what's happening, right? Latin often does this, especially if you ever read Cicero. He will talk for, 10 lines and not give you the verb until the very end, and then you finally know what he's talking about at the end, right? So it's kind of fun. So the poet to the girl, large roses he gives. Or, to put in English syntax like we had previously, the poet gives large roses to the girl. Okay? All right. So I hope that is helpful. Hope that it's clear. If you have questions, again, leave them in the comments below and I will try to get to those. And let's see here. Okay, so yeah, they're not talking about gender yet here. This is what you call declining, or excuse me, parsing. So you have poeta, and you're breaking it down, you're cutting it up, parsing into its nominative and singular, right? Poelai, dative singular. So they're breaking down this sentence for us that we just did, right? We just did all that. So magnas, accusative plural. Dependence, don't worry about that word. It's another technical grammar word that I think is just confusing. I think you can get the concept without referring to the roses as dependent on magnas, right? Okay, so don't get bogged down with all this stuff over here. These, yeah, just understand the basics: subject, indirect object, direct object, possession, that sort of thing. Like what we talked about here, okay? If you can learn that the cases function as such as a subject for nominative, of or possession for genitive, to or for dative, direct object for accusative, by, with, or away from for ablative, and to call an address for the vocative, that is sufficient. Okay? Don't get bogged down in technical terminology. All right, vocabulary. Let's take a look at that. All right. So, all right. Let's go through this a little bit. How much do we got? Not much. We'll go through the whole list here. All right. So fama, fami. Now, Latin does not have a definite article, the. So there's no the. Greek, there is a definite article, but in Latin, there is no definite article. So the way you tell a noun apart from an adjective in a dictionary list like this is you have fama and then fami. And then they tell you it's feminine. Okay? I know that's a noun before I even look at the definition because adjectives don't have one single gender, like feminine, right? So where's our, did they give us an adjective here? Yeah, not until the next page. So flip the page and I'll show you an adjective. All right. So here is an adjective, antiquus, antiqua, antiquum, right? Means old, ancient. Antique stores is where we get that word from. This, all right. So this I know is an adjective because they provide me three genders. All right. So this, something can be old. You can have a noun that's feminine that's old, a noun that's masculine that is old, like the old woman, the old man, or you can have, say, a ball and something that, for example, doesn't have, for the sake of argument, gender in it, right? It is old. So it'd be he is old, she is old, it is old, right? But this is an adjective, and because it's going to have to modify nouns of either of the three genders, it has to be able to change its gender to match the noun, because everything's got to match, remember. The nouns, though, they are what the adjective matches to. The noun gender stays the same. Like here, witha, witai, it is feminine. It's a noun, right? And it means life or mode of life. Okay, so let's go back. We'll go back through the list word by word here. All right, another thing is fama, fami. You will note that this is the nominative case, and then this is the genitive case. The dictionary will always list a noun in this way. You will have the nominative first, And then typically what you will have is just the ending I marking the genitive. So you will have, what is the word, fama? So you will have fama, and then you will have the I from the genitive to confirm that it comes from this declension, which is the first declension. And there are 4 more, right? Okay, hope that makes sense. Leave questions in the comments below. Okay, so forma, formae, feminine, noun. And you can read through the definitions here on your own. Fortuna, fortunae, nominative, fortuna. And then you have the genitive form. It's feminine. It's a noun. Ira, irae, nominative, genitive, gender. It's a noun. It means anger, right? Nauta, nautai, nominative, genitive. This is masculine, okay? This is strange. It ends in a, but it is masculine. And I believe, yeah, poet. Yeah, remember earlier I was wondering about poet? Poet is also masculine, even though it's in a feminine form. And my thought on that is that poet is not actually a Latin word. It comes from Greek. It means to weave. It comes from the Greek word poieo, which means to weave together, which is kind of what poets do. In antiquity, poets were typically men. There were some female poets also, but it's this weird thing of like if you think of a rock star, typical like rock stars, they're men typically, but they kind of have a feminine energy to them because they're dealing with poetry and the feels, and they've got the long hair, right? I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah, so it's kind of comical, but yeah, if you think of a rock star, he's got the long hair, he's got the feels, he writes good music, it moves you, it's emotional, and but yet he's a man, he's masculine. So you have here the same idea of a poet, like a musician, right? Feminine form, but it is masculine. Okay, I diverge, but that is a fun thing to talk about. Same idea with sailing, right? Steady as she goes. This idea that the sea is like always in flux, always moving. Not the same every day. I realize some of this might be offensive, but this is how the ancients saw it. This is the Roman concept of these things, right? So you have nauta in a feminine form, first declension, but it is indeed masculine. So watch out for those words. It is fun to think about ancient philosophy and how they saw the world, but also don't be confused, right? When you have poeta magnus, right? That's correct. That is a correct form because that's masculine. We haven't gotten to the masculine yet, but that's where it can be a little confusing. So these words where they have a feminine form, but note that they are masculine. Typically the a indicates feminine, but on these words like sailor or poet, they are masculine, though in a feminine form. Okay. All right, back to the subject at hand. Where do we end? Okay, nauta, nautai, patria, patriae, fatherland, feminine, noun, right? Noun. Let me do my screen freeze again. Okay, so let's see here. Patria, patriae, noun, feminine, pecunia, pecuniae, nominative, genitive, feminine, money. I think you get the idea. So go through. I always made flashcards for these. I think making your own flashcards are the best because writing them out is also your learning. Saying them out loud while you write them, flipping through them, shuffling them at random, flipping through them again until you know these words by heart. Just put the whole Latin form, porta, portae, feminine, and use tell us that it's feminine. And then, put porta, portae on one side, and then put the answer, it's feminine, and then gate or entrance on the flip side of the English side, right? So rosa, rosae, one side, and then on the flip side, give us the answer. It's feminine, and it means rose, right? Okay, so those are all actually nouns. And then we go back to where we were just a minute ago, or forward to where we were a minute ago. And we've got another noun, and then we've got some adjectives that give us here, okay? Meus, mea, meum is an adjective. Kind of like it's kind of like a personal pronoun. It means my, of, me, or and excuse me, it means my, right? So if you were to say liber meus, my book, right, and whatnot. All right. So rosa mea. Let's stick with the first declension a. So my rose, right? Let's see here. If you, let's say the poet gave or gives my rose, he would say poeta. I'll write this out for you. So I'm doing an example with meus, mea, meum because it was confusing to me when I learned this. So you could say poeta, all right, mea, excuse me, meam, rosam, dot, and then we'll say puelai. Okay, so that means the poet, my rose, accusative, singular, feminine, feminine. Now, even though I am a man and I am myself not feminine, that doesn't matter because the rose is feminine and that's what the gender is referring to. So this can still refer to me as my rose as a man, but it's in the feminine because it's got to match rose. So the poet gives dot my rose to the girl. Okay, that I hope that helps you see how meus, mea, meum will look like in real life, out in the wild, as they say. All right, multus, multa, multum. They have much, many. So much is singular, many is the plural. These are things that, like much, many, we have that in English, but you probably have never stopped to think about it. So don't let it stump you when you see it in Latin. All right. Same thing, tuas, tua, tuum. Same thing as meus, mea, meum. Same idea, except now it means you, or excuse me, your. So tuam, rosam. The poet gives your rose, puelai, to the girl, right? Et just means and. And when you have et, and they're separated by words, it means both and. In English, we have both and then the word and, so two words. In Latin, it's just one word, et. It means but. O is like hey you. This goes with the vocative, right? Let's see. So if you're addressing the girl, puela, you would say oh puela. You're addressing the girl, right? Servame was the example I think they gave us. Yeah, save me, right? All right. Sine means without. Okay, here's something interesting here that's important. Is sine is a preposition. So et and sed are conjunctions as they join things together. Et and sed means but. Sine means without. So it is a preposition. It is positioned pre a word, right? So it's prepositioned a word. So with that means the word that this preposition is in front of or positioned before, pre, that next word has to be in the ablative case, right? So that's what that means. Sine, P-R-E-P, P-R-E-P, is abbreviation of preposition. So they're spelling this out, interjection, preposition. But in future chapters, they are just going to say prep, and that means preposition. Plus ablative means that this preposition without takes the next word in the ablative case. Okay? Now, with that in mind, let's look at the exercises because I believe they have an example here. Let's see here. Where was that sample that I wanted to show you? Ah, here we go. So go back page 16. And so we're talking about this preposition, right? So look at sample C here. Patria, puellarum, sine pecunia. There's that preposition sine, without. Pecunia, non valet. Okay? So the fatherland, I think they translate this as country. It's more accurately translated as patria because it comes from pater, which means father. So of the father. right? Of the land of my fathers, the fatherland. So the fatherland of the girls, that is genitive of, you could say, possession. They own it, right? It's yeah, it's theirs, right? So the fatherland of the girls. So the fatherland then is the subject belonging to the girls. The subject is without fault, right? I think they translate. They translate it as sin also. Pecunia, or no, I'm sorry, money. I'm thinking of another word. Pecunia, money. My apologies. Okay. All right. So the fatherland is the subject, but it belongs to the girls. So the fatherland of the girls without money. And so, okay, so sine, that's the point here, without plus ABL, plus ablative. So that's what pecunia, with that long mark, that is the ablative case. Okay, if you remember from our list here, ablative. Ablative, which is what this word calls for. Sine, preposition, plus ABL, ablative. So without money, non wallet is not strong. Okay. So the fatherland without money of the girls, the fatherland of the girls without money is not strong. All right. Very good. So that is the lesson for today. Make sure you are learning the vocabulary as you go. Don't get behind on the vocab. Make sure you're memorizing that. Don't make my mistake. Pecunia means money. I'm trying to think. What is pecados means fault. I will have to look that up. At any rate, pecunia means money. Make sure you learn the vocab. All right, so go through the exercises. The answers to the exercises will be on our Patreon page. Okay, the exercises Sententiae Antiquae, the ancient sentences, is on page 19. So work through all those and translate those. Struggle through them a little bit. And then when you need help or want to check your work, we have the answers available on Patreon for a $10 a month subscription fee. And that will be up soon. And that's it. Okay. So Sententiae Antiquae 1 through 20. The last couple are English to Latin, which are a little more difficult. Remember, English is more complicated than Latin, so don't let the English scare you, right? So the girls save the poet's life. That would be, let's write this out real quick. So the girls, so it's going to be puellae, nominative plural. All right. Servant, right? Third person plural, present. The girls save. The weewam, or excuse me, the we tom. All right. The direct object, we tom, of the poet. Right? The poet's life, apostrophe S. That's the English sneaky way of getting a genitive into English, right? The apostrophe is not really natural, but yeah, that's a genitive. So poet, and it's singular. Poet's life. So puellae, the girls, servant, they save, third person plural. The we tom, direct object, accusative, okay, singular, feminine, of the poet. And poet is masculine, of course. Okay. So yeah, do the English to Latin. I know that's a little more painful, but do that also. And that is, the rest of this reading is just for fun, if you enjoy this kind of fun. Some of us do. But yeah, you may read through all this. I don't read through this or cover this in the Patreon. This is for you to do on your own if you like. Read a little bit about the history and whatnot of Rome. But yeah, that is, all right, that is lesson 3, chapter 2. Our next lesson, lesson 4, chapter 3, will be the second declension. So masculine, right? Us, I, o, and so on. All right, but that is it for today. All right, that is lesson 3, chapter 2 of Wheelock. So go ahead and do those exercises, Saintantii Antiquai, and I will have those answers up for you on Patreon today. And that is it. So thanks for stopping by today. Thanks for keeping up with your lessons. And be sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends if you like. And I will see you next week. Thank you.